We're live in 3, 2.
Welcome in to our first mock draft Monday of the season. I'm your host, Matthew Kahan, and today I'm going to be flying solo, going to be going over a full round one mock draft for the NFL draft. Before we continue, make sure to follow us on all of our social medias at Leatherbrains, and also make sure to please hit that subscribe button as well. It would mean the absolute world to us. But like I said, going to be going over a full round one mock draft today. Got a lot of interesting moves, a lot of really interesting NFL news coming out recently after the combine, after a lot of pro days that have been happening. So we're going to get right into it today. We're going to be doing like I said, all 32 picks. Going to have some interesting ones today. We are not going to be doing any trades. So I know a lot of people out there are going to be a little upset, wanting to see, some teams trade into the back end of the first round, maybe select some quarterbacks such as Shador Sanders, Jackson Dart, whatever it might be. But no matter what, we're going to be going through with this draft today, and I'm going to be doing it fresh with you guys. This is not planned at all. Going to be completely doing this on live. So we're going to start out here with the first overall pick. The Tennessee Titans are going to select Cam Ward. I think it's the easiest pick in the entire draft. It's the only one that you can really lock in and say, they're going to take him. There was a lot of question marks throughout the offseason of whether or not, Ward would be the guy, whether or not Ward was a lock to go number one over guys like Hunter and Carter, and whether or not the Titans were even interested in taking a quarterback at that point. So I think Ward is the easy pick here. He goes into this Titans offense, and I think he's going to be able to make a splash within a few years. I don't know if he's going to be able to come out guns blazing, similar to what we've seen from Jaden Daniels and CJ Stroud in the last few years, even Bo Nix, you want to include him in there. But I do think he'll come out, and he's a really good foundation piece. You can let him grow with Brian Callahan. They got a new GM there as well. So I think with Cam Ward, you got to hope that also the Titans are going to select a receiver in the second round. Calvin Ridley is your wide receiver one, and nobody else is not going to cut it, especially when you're trying to develop your rookie quarterback, who they are going to put all of their eggs into that basket. So I think Cam Ward's going to be the easy pick here, going to go number one to the Titans. And this is where it gets interesting. The Cleveland Browns, a lot of different players they could take. You could go with Shador Sanders. You could go with Abdul Carter. You could even go with Travis Hunter. I'm going to go with Abdul Carter here. I think that he is the clear-cut number one player in this draft. I think that he is easily the best player, best edge rusher. He has some of the best twitch that I've ever seen out of a player, especially at a defensive end. I think he'll be able to come in and make an impact right away. There's a lot of people out there that have said, don't take him just because you already have Myles Garrett and you already just signed him to a 4-year, $160 million contract. But in my eyes, what does that matter? You need two great defensive ends. You get to start two of them, and Abdul Carter is going to make just as big of an impact as he would on the Browns than he would on any other team. So I think you go in there, you take Abdul Carter, and if you're a Browns fan, here's how I would think about it. You just get another 10 years, hopefully, of what you just had with Myles Garrett. So if you can have the two of them, their defensive line is going to be absolutely disgusting. Whereas I just think that looking at Carter versus Hunter, I just prefer Carter as being more dominant as at his position as opposed to Hunter, who's going to be, a dog on both sides of the field. So we're going to go with Abdul Carter here, pick 2 to the Cleveland Browns. Moving on to pick 3 here, the New York Giants, a very polarizing pick for sure. A lot of Giants fans out there want them to take a quarterback. I've seen a lot of Shador Sanders. They have had a lot of internal meetings about him and even met with him at his pro day. One thing that does concern me about Sanders is they had a second or third round grade on him at the end of last season. At least that's what was reported. So I don't think that, even though he had a great year this year, I don't know how much he's really going to be able to change that narrative for them to be willing to take him in the top 3, especially when you have a player as good as Travis Hunter up on the board. And I think Travis Hunter is going to be the pick here for the Giants. I think this is a no-brainer in my eyes. He's the best player on the board at this point. He can play cornerback for them. He can play receiver, and they have a need at both positions. And I think this can work perfectly because he can be that wide receiver 2 to Malik Neighbors, where he might not have to play all the snaps on offense, but then he can play majority of snaps on defense. And I think that would be unbelievable for him because they are kind of in need for another corner, and especially a guy who's going to really transform your defense and bring that ball hawking ability. So, me and Charlie have always been high on Travis Hunter. He's a terrific player. He can play both ways at an elite level, and he's a really extremely hardworking kid. So I think that will carry him a long way in the league. I think this is where the draft really now starts to get interesting. I think those are my three top players in this draft. The easy top three in my eyes. I don't think it should go any other way. Maybe you switch Carter and Hunter, but either way, those are the top three. And then you get to the Patriots. Patriots addressed a lot of defensive issues on that side of the ball. They got Milton Williams. They brought in, I think, Jamel Dean as well. They brought in a couple linebackers and Robert Spillane. So they've added to their defense a lot. I think what they got to do is they either got to bring in a skill position player, somebody for Drake May to throw to. They already brought in Stephon Diggs on a multi-year deal, but they also got to upgrade that O-line. And so I think the pick here is going to be Will Campbell, tackle out of LSU. There has been some concern over Campbell and his ability to be able to play tackle with his arm length. I'll be completely honest, I am not concerned with that at all. I think that he will be a terrific player in the NFL. It was weird because he measured in at the combine at 32, and it was either 5 out of 8 inches or 3 out of 8. But he actually measured at the LSU Pro Day at a full 33 inches. So 33, for those who don't know, is the minimum that you're really supposed to have for arm length in the NFL to be able to play tackle. And he hits that. And I think this guy was a 3 to 4 year starter on a prolific football team. He played with guys like Jaden Daniels, Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback. So I think he's a can't miss player. And if you look too much into the analytics behind Will Campbell and why, his size isn't the best and he's more of a guard, he's going to be a great player regardless. If he doesn't end up being a great tackle, I think he'll be a fantastic guard. He's everything you want. And I think this guy's going to be Drake May's best friend at his left tackle. You missed out on a receiver here, but I just don't know if there's any receiver that's really good enough to be worth taking 4th overall. And instead, you might as well get your franchise left tackle, which are very hard to find these days in the NFL. Let's move on now to pick 5, the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is a polarizing pick. A lot of different options that they could go here. You got Mason Graham as the top option here, prolific defensive tackle from Michigan, multi-year starter, was a part of that championship defense. He, in my eyes, is the best player on the board here, and I think that's who I'm going to select. But you got to also look at the other players on the board. Armand Membu can be a great right tackle for Trevor Lawrence. That O-line has struggled a lot over the past few years. I think that if Will Campbell is on the board, I think he's the surefire pick for the Jaguars because Trevor Lawrence is where your money is. And last year you selected Brian Thomas Jr. in the first round, and rarely do we see teams select, a receiver 2 years in a row. So I've seen some mocks out there with Tet McMillan going as high as 5 to the Jaguars. I just personally don't see them investing that much capital into their offense and skill position players when their line on both sides of the ball has been extremely weak. And that's where you dominate. Look at the Eagles, look at the Chiefs, and those teams that make it far into the playoffs. You got to be able to dominate those trenches come December and come January when it's not as easy to, you're not playing in warm weather every single game. So I like Membu. I also like Tyler Warren. I think that could be an interesting play. Give Liam Cohen an absolute unicorn to work with on the offensive side of the ball. Other than Brian Thomas Jr., they don't have as much of a prolific weapon. They, cut ties with Evan Ingram, who was a pretty solid pass catcher. So I would not be shocked if Tyler Warren did end up going here. And I think it's between him and Mason Graham for me at this pick. It's just so tough. I'm going to go with Mason Graham here. I just think he's the best player on the board. You got a stud defensive tackle, and they can hopefully improve their run defense to a lot more than it was last year. But moving on to pick 6 here with the Las Vegas Raiders. And, there's a lot of interesting players. You got Will Johnson, cornerback out of Michigan. They can improve their defense. It's reported that they're actually going to be releasing their number 1 cornerback in Jack Jones. So as much as it seems like a player like Will Johnson or even Jahdae Barron out of Texas might seem, I do think that they both could be stud cornerbacks and wouldn't hate it here. I just don't know if the Raiders are going to be willing to make, this high of a pick on a corner, especially when there's other great players up. Talk of the town is Ashton Genty. There was a report saying that the owner of the Raiders, or was the GM, his son told him that he's going to walk out of his family if he doesn't take Ashton Genty. And obviously that doesn't mean anything, but it kind of shows that there are going to be a lot of people within the Raiders organization that are going to be petitioning for the Raiders to take Ashton Genty, even if that's not what they need. I don't think they're going to do it. I think Chip Kelly's going to come in. I think he's going to want to get a running back in day 2 or 3. I think the Raiders have a lot of other needs, and using a premium pick on a running back at 6th overall, I'm just not a big fan of it. I really am not a huge fan. I think that I watched a TikTok actually the other day, and they talked about the difference between, why some running backs in the first round work out and some don't, and why players like Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley, their teams were bad on their original teams. They never put together a good record or a good playoff run. And then when they were traded to the Eagles and the 49ers, those teams made it really far. And it's because great running backs in the first round, they are never going to take your team from bad to good. Ashton Genty is never going to take the Raiders from a non-playoff team to a playoff team on his own, but they can take good teams to great. And that's where I just don't think that it's a great pick for the Raiders. You could go Shedeur Sanders here, but with them extending Geno Smith, I would be very shocked if they were going to do that. So I'm actually going to go with Will Johnson here. I think that Will Johnson is a terrific cornerback. I see a lot of Patrick Surtain in him. He was a multi-year starter at Michigan. Again, another player on that championship defense. And I think that you just can't go wrong with him. And you can really beef up your secondary here, where the strengths of the Raiders defense are at the D line with Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins. Now you got a guy in the back end that can lock up for you, and you can go grab a Quinshaw Junkins or a Caleb Johnson or a Devin Neal or a Dylan Sampson, whoever you want in round 2 or 3. And I just don't think the Raiders are in a position to be taking him as a player there, or Will Johnson at 6th overall. Sorry, Ashton Genty. But let's move on to the 7th overall pick here. We got the Jets. This is a pretty much no-brainer pick for me. It's got to be either Tyler Warren or Armand Membu here. Jets do not have any good weapons outside of Garrett Wilson in terms of their receivers and tight ends. I do think Tyler Warren would be an interesting pick for them, but they also just signed Justin Fields to a 2-year contract. They have a gaping hole at right tackle. And I think that if you're looking at this Jets team and how Aaron Glenn is going to want to compete, it's going to be ran through Justin Fields and Breece Hall and Braylon Allen. And it's going to be a run-first offense. I just don't know how much Tyler Warren adds to your team. He might be a better player than Membu, but I think with the style that they're trying to replicate and they're trying to do in New York, I think Membu's a great pick here. Great right tackle on a Mizzou. He played in the SEC, and he was arguably better than Will Campbell. Will Campbell comes in as more of a left tackle, which is more valuable, but Membu was terrific at Mizzou this year, and I think that'll be a great pick for the Jets at 7th overall. Moving on now to pick 8 with the Carolina Panthers. Another team that just has a lot of holes, could be looking to really take a step this year with their team and maybe push for the playoffs in a weak division like the NFC South, where there's not a surefire team that's going to go out there and is going to have 12 to 13 wins just because of, the Bucks and the Falcons being the better teams. Either of those teams could end up falling off this year for all we know, at least in comparison to some of the other divisions in the NFC. So looking at the Panthers here, you got Tet McMillan as a pretty solid option. They did kind of come out and say that they have confidence in Xavier Legette being their wide receiver 1 in the future. And like I mentioned earlier with the Jags, we rarely are seeing teams take the same position 2 years in a row. I know the Jets just did that with Membu, but again, they did lose both their tackles last year, and that's kind of where I see that switch going. But with the Panthers here, I do think they're going to go a defensive playmaker. Seen a lot of different guys here because there's so many good defensive players that there's not a surefire guy that I think will go this high. I'm going to go with Jelon Walker here out of Georgia. He's a Micah Parsons similar player where he is listed as an outside linebacker and can play coverage on tight ends and running backs, but can also rush off the edge. He has incredible speed, again, incredible twitchiness, and I think he could be a really prolific player for the Panthers and their defense, especially because they missed out on Milton Williams in free agency. He was about to sign there and then bowed out at the last second. Offensively, they addressed so much of their offense in the draft last year that at some point you're going to have to work on your defense. And I think they're going to have to get a guy that's going to rush the passer, especially knowing that you traded Brian Burns last offseason, and he was your prolific, edge rusher. So You're getting a proven guy. He went to Georgia. He played the best out of the best in terms of, competition. So I think Jelon Walker's a great pick here. I think there's a couple other guys. They might go with a guy like Shamar Stewart. If Will Johnson's on the board here, I think they could take him and pair him up with J.C. Horn. I think that defense is the position the Panthers got to go here, and they can attack, getting another receiver in the second round if that's what they want to do. Moving on now to pick number 9. Some recent news with pick number 9 is that Shedeur Sanders is actually currently favored to go to the Saints. Now, he is favored at plus 250, so it's not at all, a surefire thing, and I don't think he's going to go to the Saints, but you definitely have to consider him with this pick, and the fact that if Kellen Moore comes in and he doesn't like Derek Carr and he doesn't like Spencer Rattler, then he might just go out there and take his guy in Shedeur Sanders. I don't think that's what they're going to do. A lot of other people think might take Ashton Genty, get the best player on the board here. They already have Alvin Kamara. They took Kendre Miller, a year or two ago. I just don't think, again, the same argument with the Raiders. The Saints are so far out that what does an elite running back really do for them? I think the best pick for the Saints would be going with Tet McMillan. You get an outside receiver for Spencer Rattler or Derek Carr, whoever's going to start this year. You got him on the outside. You got Olave in the slot, and you don't make Olave play that wide receiver one role. Olave, clearly at this point, with his injury history and just his overall play style, can be a terrific slot receiver in the NFL. But I just don't think he can be your number one go-to option on a given day. He profiles more as a Devonta Smith, as a Jordan Addison, where you need an elite number one in order to complement him well. And you also have Rashid Shaheed on the other side of the field, who's going to be a great deep threat. So if you look at Shaheed and Olave and then Tet McMillan and you get a dominant outside receiver, this could be a terrific pairing. And I like Tyler Warren a lot to the Saints earlier in the offseason, but they went out there and then they signed Juwan Johnson to a 3-year contract. And that makes me think that they have a little bit more confidence in Johnson than the media might, view. And so I think they're less likely to go a tight end there. And I think they'll go with Tet McMillan here if he is on the board at 9th overall. Now, here we go. We got the Bears. This is my team, and I think this pick is very obvious. You got to go with Ashton Genty here. The Bears have just made move after move this offseason. Last offseason, we said that the Bears could be a playoff team, and their over-under for wins was, I think, 8.5 or 9.5. Now we added even more pieces. You had Joe Thuney on the offensive line. You add Drew Dahlman through free agency. You had Jonah Jackson via trade. We added a couple pieces on defense as well. So this team is starting to look really filled out, and I think the Bears could go other positions. You could argue to go a player like Tyler Warren here and just use him as an absolute chess piece. You could argue going a defensive end, somebody like Shamar Stewart or Mykel Williams, and trying to get a young stud edge rusher. But I do think that Ben Johnson is going to see Ashton Genty and be like, wow, this guy with the already incredible passing attack we could have with Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, and Cole Kmet, adding Ashton Genty to this team could make this Bears offense one of the most fun teams to watch in the past, 5 years or so. I mean, that team is absolutely stacked in their skill positions. And Ashton Genty, in a lot of people's minds, is the best player in this draft. And so I think at 10th overall here, again, he could take the Bears from good to great. And I think the Bears are a better team than a team like, the Panthers and a team like the Raiders, who don't have as many pieces and haven't been rebuilding as long as a team like the Bears have. So I think Ashton Genty goes here. I think he's the surefire pick. And I think that, it's going to be an interesting move if he does actually end up in Chicago, because the amount of jersey sales he's going to have will be crazy. Moving on now to pick number 11. Lot of good players on the board here. I think with the 49ers, who lost a lot of players due to free agency, they are kings at hitting with later round picks. I think with an early pick, they're going to take the best player available. I think there's 2 players they might consider. The first would be just going O-line. I think Kelvin Banks here could be a really good option. Trent Williams is 36 years old. He is, playing his last days. This could be his last year for all we know. You're going to need a left tackle to protect Brock Purdy, who's most likely going to be getting $50 to $55 million a season. You got to protect him at all costs. They lost their left guard as well. So I think Banks could come in, start at left guard year 1, and then maybe make the transition to left tackle in year 2 if Williams is to depart the roster. So I think Banks is an interesting option here. The other option would be going Jihad Campbell out of Alabama. Jihad Campbell is a top 3 player in the class in my eyes. He is a incredible linebacker. He reminds me of Roquan Smith. He can make every play across the field, solid in pass coverage, great run stopper. He can rush the quarterback. The 49ers lost Dre Greenlaw. Fred Warner's coming up on 28 years old or so. Obviously, he still has a few good years left, but what could you add to this 49ers defense? The moment that Dre Greenlaw went out and tore his Achilles against the Chiefs, the entire season and this last season flipped for them. It's just a completely different environment when you have two dominant on-ball linebackers. And I think that's going to propel me here to take Jahad Campbell. Now, it's definitely a little bit early to take a linebacker, but I just genuinely think he is such an elite defensive player. And looking at these other guys on the board, Shamar Stewart, I mean, he had no sacks in college. You have these guys that don't have the same level of production and don't bring in those intangibles that a player like Jahad Campbell can bring in. So I'm going to go with Campbell here at 11. I think it's going to be a great pick for the 49ers, and he could be definitely in the running for defensive rookie of the year with a great team like the Niners if they are to bounce back. We're on the Cowboys now. This is, everyone knows, Jerry Jones. It's always going to be a wild card with him. I think we can all confidently say that defense is not going to be the pick here. You got to get an offensive player. CeeDee Lamb is the only player on this offense that excites you at all. Jake Ferguson is a solid tight end. You got your quarterback in Dak Prescott, but they're going to need some more depth than just CeeDee Lamb. So you either got to go running back or receiver here. I know that Zeke Elliott worked out really well and that he, had a ton of good seasons with him. But again, I just don't know if taking a running back here is the best option. I've seen a lot of Omarion Hampton here. I would like Omarion Hampton at 10 for the Bears if Ashton Genties goes 6 overall. Like, I don't dislike Hampton as a prospect. I think he could be an incredible running back, could be a top 10 guy in the NFL. But looking at what the Cowboys need, they need a receiver. They need somebody to complement CeeDee Lamb, like I said. And I'm going to take Matthew Golden here out of Texas, who actually might be my wide receiver 1 in this class. I scouted him a few weeks ago. Definitely go check that out on our YouTube channel, Matthew Golden Fantasy Film Breakdown. It's a really good one. He profiles more as a Stephon Diggs type receiver in my eyes, where he can be a great route runner at all 3 levels of the field. He has the deep ball. He runs a 4.29 40-yard dash. He can be utilized in the screen game because he has short hands and he can, catch it and then get into his break very quickly. And then he can, run routes over the middle of the field. And we didn't see that as much at Texas compared to the long and the short passes, but I'm not comparing him to Brian Thomas as a prospect, but a lot of people said last year that Brian Thomas couldn't run intermediate routes because he didn't show it as much in film. And sometimes when you look at a player, you have to realize that that just might not be their role in college. College offenses are a lot more specific, and sometimes guys' skills can get underutilized. And so I think Golden could come in. He would be a perfect complement to CeeDee Lamb. He can play on the outside. He'll be a speedster for them. CeeDee Lamb and Matthew Golden could be a terrific duo for Dak Prescott. And I think that would propel the Cowboys to actually be competitive in this division, where the other 2 teams in their division, 2 out of 3 teams, were in the NFC Championship last year. So you got to come out and you got to make a splash. And if they want a running back, go take one round 2. Go get Judkins. Go get TreVeyon Henderson, whoever's available. So I think Matthew Golden here, he's going to stay in Texas and he is going to go to the Dallas Cowboys. Pick 13, the Miami Dolphins. In my original first mock that I made in this offseason, I thought for sure they would go safety. They lost Javon Holland to the Giants in free agency. They have a huge need, and you have a guy like Malachi Starks from Georgia who looks like a can't-miss prospect. But now the news comes out earlier today that Teron Armstead, stud left tackle, is retiring. With Tua Tagovailoa's concussion issues, I just don't know how O-line is not the pick here. It just seems like the biggest lock to be a tackle. Again, Kelvin Banks could be a player here. You got Josh Simmons, who's arguably the best true left tackle that's still up on the board right now, just because, some people are saying, can Banks play tackle? Can he play guard? I'm going to go here with Kelvin Banks just because he's the better player out of Texas. We'll have two Texas players going in a row here. I don't have much to say about Banks, but I do think, again, he's playing the highest level of competition. He played a lot of important games for a very prolific offense. He understands complicated schemes and complicated designs. And I think when you're looking at an offense like Miami that's run by Mike McDaniel and has a lot of different behind the line pre-motion plays and a lot of different things going on the field, and you need a player who's going to be able to come in and have that at the college level, especially if Banks is going to be able to start year one, which I'm sure at 13th overall and your left tackle just retiring, you're going to be expecting him to play right away. Moving on now, we got pick 14, the Indianapolis Colts. Now, this is going to be an interesting one. Tyler Warren is the most mocked player I've ever seen to the Colts. Everyone has him going 14 to the Colts. And then I start thinking to myself, why would the Colts take Tyler Warren? Now, he's a great player, and everyone's saying, Colts missed out on Brock Bowers last year. You got to, right your wrong. But I'm looking at this Colts offense, and you have Anthony Richardson, who has proven to be a great running quarterback and has a great deep ball. You have Jonathan Taylor, who's the best player on your offense. And you have a couple good receivers with Pittman and A.D. Mitchell and Josh Downs in the slot. This offense needs to be a run-first offense. Similar to the Jets, it's not to the same level, but they're going to be building around the run game. That is how a team like the Colts is going to win. I could see Tyler Warren going here to the Colts just because they might be like, he's a unicorn. He's the best player on the board, and we just can't not draft him. But I also think that they are definitely going to consider offensive line at this pick. They really need to help out Richardson and Taylor and help build something here. So looking at this, there's not a lot of great tackles up. I talked about Josh Simmons, but they're pretty set with that. I'm actually going to go here. This is so tough. It's just such a tough situation for them. You know what? I'm actually I want to take Tyler Warren because he's the best player available, but I'm going to go with Tyler Booker here. Best offensive guard. And again, this is a very early pick for a guard, but I think that they're going to try to attack their whole. This mock has no trades in it. I think you might see a team trade up for Tyler Warren. Maybe the Colts move back and then they get their offensive lineman there and then get a couple other picks with that. So I think Booker here could be a little bit of a reach, but I think that's the position they need, that you get a star-studded guard out of Alabama. Again, proven guy who's played in the SEC, a lot of downs played. And I think this is maybe not the most exciting pick, but I think you're getting a really solid guy on your offensive line to play right guard because they just lost Will Fries to the Vikings this offseason. Looking at the Atlanta Falcons here, another team that is definitely going to go defense. Edge seems like the easy pick for them to go. You could also argue cornerback. And I think that when I'm looking at this board here, best edges available, we got Shamar Stewart, we got Mike Green, we got Mykel Williams. I just don't know how much any of those players really excite me. I just think that all of them have some very clear flaws. Mykel Williams, very young, very raw, a lot of potential, but hasn't proven as much on the field. Then you have Shamar Stewart, who has the best athleticism we've ever seen, but then can't put together more than a 2-sack season. And then you have Mike Green, who put together all the production, but he played at Marshall. And it's, are you going to question the level of competition and the tackles that he faced off against? And was that production really good and really good on him for being a great edge rusher? Or was it the competition he was playing against was not going to even be close to the level that you'll see in the NFL? So I think with that many question marks available, I'm actually going to go with a cornerback here. I think they'll take somebody outside, to work on the other side of AJ Terrell, and they're going to take Jahdae Barron here out of Texas. A lot of people have Barron as the cornerback 1 in this class, and I think you could definitely consider him at the cornerback 1, and he ends up falling all the way to 15 with the Falcons. I think it's a great pick. Again, a guy who's going to come out of Texas. He played against the highest level of competition. He checks all the boxes. I think this is going to be a great pick for the Falcons. And their D-line is going to struggle a little bit next year, and that's going to be a definite concern of, taking a player like this. But when I see him as such a better prospect than some of these other guys, I think you just have to take him. Moving on now to the Arizona Cardinals. I would love to mock them taking a receiver, but they just won't do that. They already have so much invested into their offense. They took Marvin Harrison, 4th overall last year. And the Cardinals have just been known in the past few years to just always take a bust in the first round. Like 1 year, it's Isaiah Simmons. Year 2, it's Zaven Collins. They're just year 3, even last year, Darius Robinson. They just be taking these really random players and they almost never work out. So I think here you got to go with an edge rusher. That's their top need. It's really tough again because there's a lot of different guys up on the board. I'm going to go with Mike Green here. I think they're going to take him just looking at his production, looking what he was able to do. He is definitely going to have some risk to him knowing the conference that he played in, the competition that he played. But I do think a lot of people like Mike Green. A lot of people like what they saw out of his pro day, out of his combine appearance. So I definitely do not hate that at all. I think it could be a really solid pick for them. Got Mike Green there. Let's move on to pick number 17. We got the Cincinnati Bengals. They need run defense here very, very badly. They just need a defensive tackle, somebody to plug up the hole. We'll see what happens with Trey Hendrickson. As of right now, there's nothing about him getting traded. But he, assuming that he stays, is going to be their premier edge rusher. So I think you got to go with a defensive tackle here. And looking at the best available, there's some good run stuffers. There's some good pass rushers. I personally think that they are going to go with a guy like Walter Nolan here out of Ole Miss. His intangibles are off the charts. I've seen a lot of people have him in the top 10 of their their overall prospect rankings. I think Walter Nolan is going to be a great player for this Bengals defense. It really came down to him and Derek Harmon, and I think Derek Harmon might be a little bit better as a pass rusher. And I think Walter Nolan, just as a player from Ole Miss, has a little bit of a higher ceiling, and I think can help out that Bengals defense. Moving on now to pick 18, we have the Seattle Seahawks, another team that I really did think was going to go out there and take receiver originally. And then they go out there, they sign Cooper Kupp, they sign Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Seattle needs O-line. They're going to be a ground and pound team. They're going to want to control the clock, and their O-line has been atrocious for these last few years. There's not really any good tackles on the board. I think right tackle and right guard are their two biggest needs, but there is a really good guard up. Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State. Now, North Dakota State, not a great program in terms of the competition that you're playing. They're obviously not in the Power 5, but we have seen a lot of NFL talent come out of there. Carson Wentz, Christian Watson, Trey Lance. Obviously, you ended up busting, but I do think Gray Zabel is a very safe player to take. Again, guards typically really only go this high if they are really that good. He proved it for all the games. He was a multi-year starter, and I think that he'll come in and really make an impact on the Seattle offense that's going to want to run through guys like Kenneth Walker and like Zach Charbonnet in that short game. And so they're going to need guys that are going to be able to come in, play a lot of downs, and be able to block well. So I think Gray Zabel is going to be the pick here at pick 18. Pick 19 here, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I thought, Jahad Campbell would be a great pick for them. I thought Jahdae Barron would be a great pick for them. They need a lot of things, especially on defense. Their defense really struggled last year. I think they're going to go with an edge rusher here. That is currently where the value stands. Now, you could argue they go with a player like Malachi Starks, and I actually think I might be changing my mind here and taking Starks because I honestly forgot that he was still on the board. One of their top needs is safety. They got Sean Murphy-Bunting. They have Antoine Winfield, but imagine pairing up Antoine Winfield with Malachi Starks. You have an absolutely elite safety duo in your back end. It's a little risky to have two good safeties, but I do think having those two players can make your defense elite, and I think he is by far the best defender on the board right now. And so I'm going to go with Malachi Starks here at pick 19 from Georgia. I think this is a great pick here by them. We got the Denver Broncos up at 20th overall. This is very clear to me. They need a skill position player. They need a running back. They need a receiver. You got a lot of good guys up. You got Emeka Egbuka out of OSU as a potential receiver because the Broncos right now have a very solid outside receiver in Cortland Sutton, but then they're kind of lacking somebody in the slot. They didn't make any moves in free agency to get guys like Cooper Kupp or Chris Godwin or Stephon Diggs. So looking at the receiver, you have Emeka Egbuka, you have Luther Burden out of Mizzou, who another player that I just did a player film breakdown. That's going to be coming out soon. So definitely make sure to check that one out. But I am actually going to go with Omarion Hampton here out of UNC. I think he fell a little bit. And I think Charlie actually did a fantasy film breakdown on him last week. So everybody go check that out and see exactly why the Broncos are going to be taking him. He's a prolific runner. If Genty was not in this class, Hampton would be the RB1 in a lot of different classes. He's a 3-down back, bounces off of tackles seamlessly. He has great speed. He runs in the 4.4s. There's nothing that he can't do. He can catch the ball as well. So I think having this guy and an elite running back in a Sean Payton-led offense is exactly what the Broncos need. Their running back depth right now is Jaleel McLaughlin and Audric Estime, who are two very mediocre players. I think you need to take a stud here, get your guy, and you can attack the receiver position in round 2 with the amount of depth there is. And you could argue there's a ton of depth at the running back position as well. But I just think that Hampton is the best player available right now. And I think the Broncos don't even think twice and they take him. Pick 21, the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think we got to go Shedeur Sanders here. Shedeur Sanders has fallen far enough. A player that could be selected within the top 3 falls all the way to pick 21. And I think with Shedeur Sanders, if you're not one of those teams in the top 9, honestly, that's looking for a quarterback, if he doesn't go there, all those teams that we just went through, none of those teams need a quarterback. And that's where, to me, I just can't see anyone really trading up for Shedeur. I think the Steelers know that they're in a situation where all these teams ahead of him, Sam Darnold with, the Seahawks, you have Mayfield with the Bucks, Bo Nix with the Broncos, Kyler, you got Penix, all these teams have their quarterback situation figured out. So I think Shedeur Sanders can fall all the way. And I think the Steelers, it's very clear, they've been looking for their quarterback for a while. Aaron Rodgers is likely to be their starter for this season. I think that's perfect. You have Aaron Rodgers for 1 year, let him play. Then you got Shedeur Sanders coming in with year 2. You got DK Metcalf, you traded for him. You got George Pickens. You got Pat Freiermuth. You can add other pieces in the draft. I think that Shedeur, that's the best quarterback they're going to get. The Steelers will never be picking high enough to ever get an elite quarterback prospect. And so Shedeur Sanders, who, again, in a lot of people's eyes, could be a top 3 pick, falling all the way to 21, is a surefire pick for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Moving on to pick 22 here, we got the LA Chargers. This is another tough one. I do think that they're going to go tight end here. They missed out on the Evan Ingram sweepstakes. They have never really had a tight end the last few years, even ever since Hunter Henry left them 4 years ago or whatever it was. They just have not had that prolific tight end. A lot of people have had Colston Loveland getting drafted. He's a great player, came from Michigan with Harbaugh, obviously, and he is a first-round talent. But with Tyler Warren still on the board, I mean, this is arguably the best pick in the draft. Tyler Warren, in some people's eyes, is a top 5 player, falling all the way to 22 with Jim Harbaugh. You give Justin Herbert another prolific weapon. And I think the Chargers really need to work on their outside receivers. And I think that, I was surprised when they didn't bring in a bigger body guy. And I know Mike Williams came in on a 1-year deal, but he's really not going to move the needle on your offense. So I think bringing in Tyler Warren, a big target over the middle of the field, it is going to be so difficult to contain him and Ladd McConkey. And, the blocking that he brings as well to that O-line is exactly what Harbaugh is looking for in order to, be a run-first offense. And they brought in Najee Harris, so I don't think they're going to want to attack that running back position in round 1. I could see it happening in round 2, but I think round 1, you got to take the best player on the board, and that is Tyler Warren. Moving on now to the Green Bay Packers. A lot of people are going to have them drafting a receiver like we do every single season. Is that actually going to happen? No, because the Packers owners never want to take a receiver in the first round. They always think they can find talent late. I've seen, Emeka Buka having a meeting with them, and it is possible that they take him, but looking at his profile and how he profiles more as a slot receiver, where does that kind of leave Jaden Reed, who's arguably their best receiver? So I think looking at the board and looking at the best players available, I think edge is definitely the pick here. I think they're going to go here with Michael Williams, the Georgia product. Again, he's only 20 years old, and I think getting him this late in the draft, you can develop him. The Packers are going to keep continuing to build those trenches because that's what wins football games come December, come January. I think that's a really good pick by the Packers, and a lot of Packers fans out there are definitely going to be upset with the fact that they're just taking another random defensive player that might not make an impact, but Michael Williams could come out in year 1 and really be great, especially with Lucas Van Ness, who was their first round pick a few years ago. His contract is coming up. So he hasn't been that great. I don't think they're going to want to pay him. You bring in Michael Williams to be the eventual replacement. Minnesota Vikings are up here. At first, I thought they were going to take a running back. Travion Henderson was a player that I loved going to the Minnesota Vikings. But I do think that at this pick, they're going to take best player available. And I think that their best player and their top need would be getting a safety, a guy who can make plays on the defensive side of the ball, that can go into that Brian Flores defense and make an impact and develop under him. So I am going to go with Nick and Amanware, I think is how you pronounce it, out of South Carolina. This is a guy who had one of the most incredible combine performances of all time at the safety position. This is a DK Metcalf level of combine performance that he had. So I think he's going to go late round one here to the Vikings, who again, a safety to one of the less important positions, on the football field. But the Vikings come in, can get a stud to replace Harrison Smith in the long run. And I think they can get their guy here, Nick Amanware. And I think this is again another surefire pick where you have teams taking the best players available as opposed to taking a developmental, defensive lineman. You have them taking a star-studded safety that you can develop for the first couple weeks of the season, have him learn under guys like Harrison Smith, and then he can start for you, in the future. And you already know the stuff like his athleticism, the stuff that you can't teach is already there. So you have that advantage already. Moving on now to the Texans at pick 25, a team that needs a lot. Their defense is looking great. I don't think they're going to take defense, but their offensive line struggled like crazy last year. They did pick up Cam Robinson and Trent Brown as their left and right tackles on both one-year deals, but I do think that they are going to need to buff up that offensive line. So I think they're going to be taking Josh Simmons here. Again, he is a true left tackle, and I do think he provides a lot of good exposure for their offensive line. I think that's exactly where he could be, making a huge impact. He does have some issues when it comes to staying on the field, and I think that could be something that really does change kind of the mindset that a lot of people have on him going into it. But I do think he's a great player. He's easily the best offensive lineman on the board, and the Texans get somebody to help protect CJ Stroud. Moving on now, we have the Los Angeles Rams. Again, another team that could use pretty much anything. We've seen how fast Sean McVay has been able to transform this team. Everyone was saying they're in cap hell and they gave up all their picks to win a Super Bowl. And guess what? They did that and then ended up being the second best team in the NFC last year. If you look at how teams performed against the Eagles in the playoffs last year. So, and obviously that's just one thing, but how good the Rams ended up looking come the second half of the season. So Jahad Campbell was a player that if he does end up falling all the way into the 20s, that I think the Rams, if they swooped him up, he would be an absolute monster. And they could use a cornerback as well. Their secondary has looked a little weak, but I do truly think that Sean McVay is going to come out and he's going to see Colston Loveland and he's just going to want to take him. He's going to want a vertical threat tight end that he can use. And imagine that trio of Colston Loveland, Puka Nacua, and Devontae Adams. Devontae is going to be on his way out in a year or two. So I think having Loveland for the long run, he is the best player on my board right now. And I think he'll be the pick here for the Rams. And that would just be an unbelievable situation for his fantasy value. I mean, if Loveland ended up there, I know the quarterback situation is a little bit unknown right now, but Loveland is just an incredible player. And I just think that, if the Rams have a chance to take him, then you gotta make that move and take him early on. I like that for the Rams. So moving on now to the Ravens. And this is where we get into the teams that outside of the Commanders, honestly, that have everything. And you're just taking, depth pieces at this point that hopefully can come in and make an impact day one. But with the Ravens, I do think they could use a little bit of O-line. I think they could also use defensive end. I think they're going to go here with Shamar Stewart, who has fallen a lot in this draft. Again, we've talked about him, how athletic he is. The intangibles are crazy, but where's the sack numbers? Where are they? He did have a pretty high pressure rate, and that's what a lot of people are going to argue of why he could go earlier in the draft. But I think there are going to be some sticklers out there and some teams that say, hey, we're not going to be willing to take that risk on a player who was never able to produce sacks at even the college level. But I think at this point with the Ravens, if you see who Shamar Stewart is as a prospect and you're willing to pass up on him, I just think that could be an absolutely huge mistake, especially with looking at these top prospects. There isn't a can't miss prospect that's still on the board at this point. So I think that's where Shamar Stewart's going to go at 27th overall to the Baltimore Ravens. It's a great pick here. He's going to be able to develop and doesn't have to start year one, which is going to be great for them long term. Moving on now to the Detroit Lions, another team that, again, they were the 1 seed last year, had a pretty early exit, lost first round to the Washington Commanders, and they are going to be looking for a vengeance. There's two positions that they definitely need, and that's edge and that's offensive line. And people are going to be out there and saying they don't need offensive line. They have a bunch of good guys. They lost Kevin Zeitler in free agency. They lost Dan Skipper, their backup left tackle. So even though they kept, the core guys on their offensive line, I do think that offensive line could be in play here. I do think defense could also be in play looking at how poor it was down the stretch. So I think they're actually going to go out here and they're going to take, it's really tough because you have Nick Scorton on the board and you also have James Pierce. You have Derek Harmon. I'm going to go here with James Pierce. He's a little bit smaller of a player, but he was a player that came into this year as a top 5 prospect. Everybody thought that he was going to be the top defensive end taken in this draft class. What do you know? He ends up falling all the way down because of his size and just not, a lot of teams out there not seeing him big enough to play at the NFL level. But he did have really solid production. He played at a great school at Tennessee and played the toughest competition in the SEC. So I think that James Pierce here with the Lions, they're going to take a shot on him, put him outside of Aiden Hutchinson or on the other side, and he'll be able to develop, alongside another really premier edge rusher. And now you potentially have a great edge rushing duo for the future. So I think you could go him there. You could go Nick Scorton, you could even go Landon Jackson out of Arkansas, but I think Pierce will be the pick here as he has fallen a little bit more than people would have expected. Moving on now to the Washington Commanders, another team that made a really deep playoff run last year out of nowhere, came up a little bit short to the Eagles, but they did attack a lot of their positions in free agency this year. They brought in Laramie Tunsil at left tackle. They brought in Deebo Samuel at receiver, which makes me think that they are fine at the offensive line and at the skill position. I do think that they could take a running back here. I think that Travion Henderson is most definitely in play. Did a fantasy film breakdown on him a couple weeks ago. He is a great runner. He is a great pass blocker too, which I think will be unbelievable for that Washington Commanders team, whose running back core right now is Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler, who it's just not that great of a running back core. And the Commanders are a team that sees themselves going far again in the playoffs and being a contender. And so I think Travion Henderson is most definitely on the board, but I think you also have to address, if you're the Commanders, the edge position. You lost Dante Fowler to free agency in this offseason. Where are you going to get that production back? I'm not exactly sure. So I think that at this pick, you can either go Nick Scorton here or Travion Henderson. I'm going to go with Travion Henderson, actually. I think that the Commanders are going to go out there and they're going to get their guy. I think that he's going to be a prolific running back in this offense. And as okay as Brian Robinson is, and, Austin Eckler with one more year on his contract, you can bring in a guy like Henderson to be your starting back for the next 4 years and never look back. So I think Henderson comes in, he's prolific from day one and probably starts by week 5 to 6 in the season. And he also becomes an absolute fantasy gem in rookie drafts and would be a guy that would go incredibly high and even redraft if he was drafted to the Commanders in the first round. Moving on now to the Buffalo Bills, third to last pick of this draft or of the first round. But another team that doesn't really need as many players. They were a contender last year. At this point, it's just continuing to add pieces that can make an impact down the stretch. I think you either got to go with a defensive tackle here or go with secondary. I do like Derek Harmon. He has fallen a lot, the defensive tackle out of Oregon, but I do really like also Siobhan Ravel out of East Carolina. He's a great cornerback. This would be going more towards the Quinyon Mitchell route that the Eagles took last year, where you're taking a cornerback who had incredible production out of a smaller school and hoping that he works out. He ran a pretty solid 40-yard dash in the 4.4s. I think Siobhan Ravel being the third cornerback off the board here to the Bills is a pretty solid pick, considering that they missed out on Kyer Elam a few years ago, and he just ended up being a complete bust for them. Tre'Davious White left their roster a few years ago. So Bills need a cornerback to come in and make an impact. And again, he might not have played that top competition going to a school like East Carolina, but when he's going to be put into this, Bills Mafia culture and be put around these other great defensive players, I think that he could come in and make an impact day one alongside guys like Taron Johnson. And, Micah Hyde did retire, I believe, and Jordan Poyer as well. So you need people in the secondary to be able to bring it up to what it was a year ago. Pick 31 here with the Kansas City Chiefs. I think this is also a no-brainer pick for me. See, it's tough because I do also really like Kenneth Grant out of Michigan, but I think Derek Harmon is the best player available here out of Oregon. You get another defensive tackle alongside Chris Jones, who is, they did sign him to a pretty big extension, but he is getting to his last years, being in his, early to mid 30s of his age. So I think Harmon can come in and make an impact on that defensive line. Offensive line is going to be an issue for the Chiefs, and they might address that at this pick. There's just nobody at the offensive line that I really love. You could go Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State, who could play tackle or guard, and I think they very well could take him if they think he's a great prospect. But I just think Harmon at this point, they might have him ranked a lot higher than they would a player like Jackson. I think because of that, they're going to be willing to take him a little bit earlier on. Moving on now to our last pick of the first round, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Birds, the Super Bowl champions. They don't need that much. They brought back most of their important players. They lost Mekhi Becton in free agency. They lost Darius Slay. But I do think if I know the Eagles, what are they going to do? They're going to take players in the trenches. I think that they're either going to go with Donovan Jackson here out of Ohio State. Again, a guard who can slot in there and be their right guard of the future. I also think that they could take a receiver here and say, hey, we have AJ Brown, who's coming up on the end of his contract. We have Devonta Smith, who's also coming up on the end of his contract. And I'm not saying that they might not bring back both of them. I think minimum one is coming back for another extension. But with Luther Burden on the board and Emeka Egbuka on the board, it is very, very intriguing for a team like the Eagles to go best player available and to take one of those receivers. It's too risky of a pick, though, for me. And so I think with this pick, I'm actually going to go with Kenneth Grant. Defensive. No, I'm going to go with Nick Scorton. No. See, it's just such a tough pick because the Eagles, they don't have that many needs. I'm going to go with Kenneth Grant, actually, out of Michigan. Played right next to Mason Graham. You could argue that some of his production was because of, playing right next to Mason Graham, but he played at Michigan, played at the highest level of competition. Another guy who's a multi-year starter, a guy who I think could be one of the biggest steals of the draft, especially if he does fall into round 2. And I think that the Eagles could get a stud at defensive tackle where they just let go of Milton Williams in free agency, who is a huge pickup for them, a few years back. And so a lot of people out there are going to say, hey, you already got Jalen Carter and you got Jordan Davis, and now you're going to bring in another defensive tackle. That's what the Eagles do. They like to rotate their guys. They like to keep them fresh. And Jordan Davis, who knows how much longer he'll be on this team? His production has looked shaky at times, and he's going to come up on a contract year, I think this next year or maybe the year after, and they're going to have to analyze whether or not they're going to be able to pay him with all the other contracts they already have. So I think Kenneth Grant, he's the long-term Davis replacement, but will also get playing time year 1. And that'll cap off this mock draft Monday, our 1.0. Definitely hope that everybody out there enjoyed the live stream. Next week, you will get to see Charlie do his mock draft 1.0. It's definitely an exciting time in April, having a draft season, and we're only at this point 2.5 weeks away from the NFL draft. So again, make sure to follow us on all of our socials at Leatherbrains. And also on top of that, make sure to check out our YouTube channel, Leatherbrains Podcast. Hit the subscribe button and check out all of our recent videos and our fantasy film breakdowns. Let us know in the comments if there's anything else that you want to see at the next Mock Draft Monday. We'll see you next time, and we're out.
3, 2, 1.
Got a blast!
Thanks for checking out the Fantasy Brains. Don't miss next week's episode, Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. See you next week, Brainiacs.